Welcome to the VTCLA Podcast, Season 1. Today we have a special guest, and it is our first superintendent that we have interviewed in these series. This makes it particularly interesting because of her past experience and role as a curriculum director. So we thought that Libby Bonesteel would be the perfect person to bring onto the podcast to chat about the current state of education and the things that apply to both the worlds of superintendents and curriculum people. Libby, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be your first superintendent guest.
Nicely put. So start just by kind of introducing yourself and talking a little bit about how you landed where you are as the superintendent in Montpelier-Roxbury School District.
I have a wide and varied past in education. I think one of my claim to fame is that I've worked in probably every kind of school imaginable school district or school. I've worked in inner city in Brooklyn. I've worked in very rural and very poor Louisiana in the South. I've worked in incredibly wealthy and affluent international school in Vienna, Austria. And I did all of those things as a teacher. I was primarily a first and second grade teacher. I love the second graders. They're my favorite. They're my people still. Love going into second grade classrooms. And when I was in Vienna, Austria, I had the opportunity to join the Michigan State program for educational leadership in Plymouth, England. So it was super interesting because it was all international educators learning to be administrators together. We did 2 summers in England together, and it was just simply an amazing experience. It was me in Vienna and people in Singapore and Malaysia and all kinds of places. And it was through Michigan State. So we had that opportunity, and I'd say that I have the personality flaw that whenever I see somebody in a position that is higher up than me, that I see them and I think I could do that if they can do it. That's how I ended up in that educational leadership program. I had a principal in Vienna who was an amazing, lovely person. And she was a interesting principal. So I said, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And that's how I ended up in the Michigan State program. And then it was just time to come home. So when it was time to come home, my husband Jesse and I went on a website called chooseyourspot.net. It's no longer available. I used to always say, if you have 45 minutes, do it. It's super fun. But you answer about 85 lifestyle questions and it spits out 20 places in the US where you'd want to live that matches your lifestyle preferences. And Burlington, Vermont was one of them. So neither of us, I grew up in Syracuse, New York, and Jesse grew up in New Hampshire, and neither of us wanted to go to those places. So I started applying for jobs in the Burlington area, and I got a job as an assistant principal under our friend Greg Marino over at Essex Elementary School. And they brought me back from Austria, and I was there for a couple of years as assistant principal and co-principal, and Greg jump shipped over to Williston. And then I became a teacher development coordinator for Essex for a while. So I kind of cut my teeth in Vermont in administration in what was then Essex Town School District. And from there I went up to Missisquoi, what's now Missisquoi, and I spent 5 wonderful years as a curriculum director up in Swanton and serves that community and loved it. And then once again, I had a superintendent and I looked at him and I said, if he can do it, I can do it. And that's how I ended up as a superintendent in Montpelier-Roxbury. They had a really late search process. And so I think I was the last best choice or their only choice at the time. So I got the gig in Montpelier and I've been there ever since.
How long has that been?
This is my 7th year as superintendent.
7th year. Okay.
Yeah. I still feel like a newbie.
Yeah. You still feel like a newbie. It's illuminating.
Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit about, we'll expand out into Vermont, but start with your district. What are some of the most important pieces of work that your district's tackling right now?
We have been really focused. We have our 4 pillars, which are not going to be distant to any curriculum director, but this is everything we put, every piece of work we put into is around guarantee and viable curriculum, prioritizing that curriculum. Another one is collaborative practices and collective efficacy of our educators and our administrators. The third is a timely system to intervene enrich and remediate. And then the fourth is high quality instruction in every classroom. So for right before and during the pandemic, it was an amazing time for us to ramp up the curriculum work, as I'm sure my curriculum director, Mike, would tell you as well, because teachers realized finally that they can't teach everything. And so they bought into that during that time of closure. He did so much work around prioritizing our curriculum and making the proficiency scales off of that. It was great work for Mike during that time and our teaching staff. And when we came out of it, of course, we needed to really be looking at what our kids needed. So for the past few years, we've been putting most of our balls in the bucket around timely systems to intervene, enrich, and remediate. Really being specific about how we're defining those terms and how a child accesses support, making sure we have the human resources behind what we need in both social emotional learning and academics. And right now, I'd say our flywheel, as Jim Collins would say, is starting to move much faster. And we're seeing results of a pretty effective system in place for that piece. And so that's exciting. And now it's time for us to continue moving on to our fourth pillar around high quality instruction. So we've really been talking about as a leadership team now of developing inclusive, culturally responsible teaching practices. And what does that look like? And if we have an instructional framework for that we can all have a common language for what best practice actually is. We use that term all the time, but we all mean different things when we say best practice. So really talking about what is our instructional framework and is it inclusive and is it culturally responsible, all under the umbrella of an equitable place for people to be. So it's really been great work. And the beauty of it is that in my 7 years, my teachers cannot claim that there's a new thing. If they do, I'm like, nope, we just need to do a better job of connecting it all because there's 4 pillars and that's all we've been working on for the last 7 years. So that's been, I think they're finally understanding how we're building in each consecutive year. And it's been fantastic work that the leadership team has done around it and the teachers have done. Oh, wait, I can't hear you.
Helps to unmute when you're hosting a podcast to ask a question. Okay, let's try that again. So you talked about the work you've done on intervention systems starting to show positive results. And in another podcast, we talked about how do you know these things through your most trusted assessments. So what are the things that you're trusting the most that tell you that progress is being made?
Well, there's qualitative and there's quantitative, right? So qualitatively, our professional learning communities that we have rocking and rolling understand that the tier 2 intervention, the reteach of our priority standards, is the grade level teacher's responsibility. It's the PLC's responsibility. That's never happened before. And so what we have is teachers understanding that the priorities are their responsibility. They're the most knowledgeable about those grade level priorities. So they're the ones who need to do the reteach. And in certain places across the district, it's not everywhere, but in certain places, it's literally looking at the whole grade level student data of the common formative assessment and saying, who's taking who? So it's not my class anymore. It's, I did really well here. So let me take that group. Like I know what to do with them. And I was just meeting with my elementary school principal yesterday, and she said this is the first year that they're getting to the what do we do when kids already know how to do it. So they're finally getting to the enrichment piece of it as well,
Yeah.
which is super exciting. That's a place
Yeah.
we haven't been able to go before. So it's been qualitatively, it's been really crystal clear about what those definitions are and making sure everybody knows their roles and responsibilities. Because what was happening before, and I don't think we're unique, is it was the loudest teacher's voice would get the most intervention support from an outside teacher, right?
Mhm.
Or they'd have instructional assistants working with the most struggling kids, which I still
Right.
think happens in a few places, but that's another story.
Yeah.
And so now our interventionists are doing the remediation work. They're doing the piece that are like filling the holes. And we're in the place where kids are getting the tier 3 remediation services. They also could be getting the tier 2 intervention services. And everybody understands that those are different things.
Yeah.
So qualitatively, I just see a lot more ownership of the system from the teachers and the principals. The principals understand it to a T. quantitatively, we're seeing just significant strides, particularly in our middle school level, our middle school assessment scores, and we use Renaissance Star and all that. We use
Right.
those screeners. And those scores from just our local assessments are off. Like they're going so high. Mainstream Middle School made a goal to increase their proficiency by 10%, and they in 3 or 4 years or something like that, and they hit it in a year and a half. And so like we're really seeing results, particularly at our middle school level. Um, we're it's interesting at the elementary school level because we have really great systems in place, and we're not quite seeing the results we want to see just yet there.
Mhm.
So we're trying to figure out why, like
Yeah.
what
I,
are
I wonder just off
there.
the top whether the content area specialties versus generalists has any role in that, and perhaps elementary school teachers being required to take on too much,
Yeah,
instruct too many things, and building in the social emotional learning foundations are essential at those grades. And that may come at the expense of some content development in terms of
yeah,
skills. So it's an interesting question.
it
But
is.
it's great news. I mean, to hear somebody say the things that you just said is, to be quite honest, kind of rare in the last few years.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. It's great. It's great work. Our systems are like people know what it. Mike did all kinds of just qualitative assessments last year of his own work of like define MTSS for me, just open-ended questions, whereas we would have never gotten a common answer on that. Nearly every person named exactly what we wanted them to name. Nearly every person who took the survey. So like just things like that, when people are so knowledgeable about the system and how the system's supposed to work, then we can look at the gaps of like why isn't it working, right? In the places that it's not. So it's exciting.
Yeah, and it speaks to the power of clarity of purpose when everybody in your system can give you, I always said defend and define. If you can define it and then defend it, then you know your system's moving in the right direction. If all
Right.
the people within your system.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I want to move on to the next question, but I do just want to ask this one thing about now the shift to more culturally responsive pedagogy. And Mike and some of your other folks spoke at our first VTCLA meeting around disproportionality. And if you could just briefly talk about the role that's played, because it was a fascinating session, and a lot of members left there wanting more.
Yeah, it's still very new work, I'll
Yeah.
tell you. And I am not the owner of the work. Mike, Jess Murray, and Nick Connor, and Peggy Sue Van Ostrin, who are my central office leaders, are really the all-stars behind this work. But we did have an equity audit done last year, 2 years, last year. And as part of their work, the team coming in from the outside wanted to do the disproportionality analysis of our scores and how we're identifying children for special education needs and that kind of thing. And we couldn't give it to them because our numbers are too small and we were breaking for a buck. And so what that team said was give us the resources and we'll do it. And so we started looking at really our disproportionality data first around who's identified for special education services, what categories, what are we seeing the most in? So for instance, our students who identify as transgender are extremely overrepresented in anxiety. And so that's like, I mean, one could say there's obvious reasons for that. And at the same time, what are we doing as a system to ensure that kids who are questioning their gender identity feel like they belong in our system? Like what are the barriers to them? To that piece. We also do disproportionality over our data in disciplinary actions. So we are overrepresented in not by a huge amount, but we do have overrepresentation of African American males in our discipline data. Um, and so why is that? Like what happens there? And and how do we get through and I admit I still don't know mathematically how this is. And I keep saying, just explain it to me mathematically. Like when our numbers are so small,
Right.
how does that influence pieces? And Julie Conrad, who's our principal at Main Street Middle School, is a math whiz, and she's talking about, well, it's statistical significance, right? So, and
Right.
it's statistical reliability.
Right.
And so because our numbers are smaller, they not be as reliable. However, as Nick will point out, there's still a story. And
Yeah.
that's where the qualitative
Yeah.
information comes in. You can't belittle the fact of one person's experience because the numbers are too small.
Yeah.
Still experience. So we've been looking at that as a leadership team. We need to move it into our teaching staff. And we're doing that slowly and surely. First, we're making sure every leader, including myself, understands how to talk about this work.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important because we have to lead the way around
Mhm.
that. We have shown some of the disproportionality to our adults in our system, and you can predict the responses, right? Our equity passionate people are outraged and want to move really quickly and do something, but they don't really know what to do. And then our people who want to believe in the small sample size being too much of an influence will make excuses for the data
Right.
away. And so we just have to, that's where people are. And we
Yeah.
have to work on how do we move forward without shaming anybody and
Right.
say it's not okay still. Like this
Right.
is not okay. We need to do better as a system. So we've really changed our language too from achievement gap to opportunity gap.
Yeah.
So we look at our systems and not the kids. So we've been doing some really interesting work there. I think we still need to be more intentional in how we share it with our faculty and our community. I think we're a little shy on that.
Yeah.
And there's always time. How do you have time? Because that conversation needs a whole lot of time behind it.
Yeah, it does. And thanks for the reminder of the symbiotic relationship that needs to exist between qualitative and quantitative data. I think we've done an awful lot lately of we need to increase outcomes, improve outcomes, and we only are really talking quantitatively when we talk about it from a state view. So
Mhm.
thanks for that reminder. Talk a little bit about how being a curriculum director has served you in this particular role in that intersection of the work.
Well, it's interesting because I'd love to hear Mike's answer that question.
Yeah.
Right. Ask Mike and then put it in the podcast so I can listen to it. Um, so so when you're a curriculum director, your job is to learn, right? You are the lead learner in the school system. Your job is to go to all the events, hear it, think about how you fit in the system or not, to lead other people in that learning. And so that's a mindset that I think every superintendent needs, right? So there's that. There's the mindset of being the learner and always keeping your mind open of what's next, what's coming up, where are gaps with, looking at it that way. The systems piece that curriculum directors do is my jam. It's always been
Hmm.
my jam. And so as superintendent, I see the system even in a more fully complex way. And so it that can benefit me as well in board conversations. And when I'm lobbed question after question after question, that's great that I can
Yeah.
see systems as a whole and how they influence each other. And you learn how to do that as a curriculum director, just in terms of assessment, instruction, and
Yeah.
standards and things. I think that so those pieces are really important. So for instance, right now I'm leading the work on instructional framework. I'm doing that work, and so that's fun for me. I love talking about that. I just personally think curriculum director is like the best administrative gig you can get, and I probably shouldn't have left it. But so that's super fun for me, and it's what I call a red thread in my professional world. You want to pull on as many red threads as you can to make you wanting to come back to work every morning, and that's one of my red threads.
Yeah.
I think that I didn't spend a whole lot of time in hard conversations as a curriculum director.
Right.
Um, and so that was not a benefit to me,
Right.
entering into a place where
Right.
so I've had to learn that as a superintendent,
Yeah.
whereas like if you were a principal or a special education director, you're used to those conversations.
Hmm.
You have
Hmm.
those. So I
Yeah.
think that's the benefit of going that route into the superintendency. But
Yeah.
the systems piece and the learning piece might even override that, because if you're a learner, you're going to learn how to have hard conversations.
Yeah, it's a fascinating take. Thanks, especially in comparison to if you're coming from that principal experience or special ed director. So I'm going to combine the next two questions because they are related. and that is getting you to talk a little bit about the challenges currently facing Vermont Ed. We've sort of seen these coming for a while, and then we saw the waiting study, and so we knew that was going to impact as well. And then we didn't see, of course, COVID coming, but the confluence of many, many things has landed us where we are, where we really are having existential conversations about Vermont education. And so I want you to talk a little bit about the challenges and then transition to, we've got a commission on the future of Vermont Ed, working on suggestions for the legislature. We know the legislature is going to try and take some actions. So talk about the challenges and where you hope they might go in terms of suggestions.
I think one of the biggest challenges, this is like totally for my superintendent hat right now. I think the
Sure.
biggest challenges is how we finance this work. I
Yeah.
truly think that's the biggest challenge that we face right now. The way we do it, that Act 127 was the right move to make, and man, that walloped districts like mine, and it will
Hmm.
continue to wallop us as we move forward because our equalized pupils are so much less
Yeah.
as a result. And I still think it was the right move to make, right?
Yeah.
The way you can't argue with the weights needed updating.
Right. Right.
Absolutely. I think there were some problems that were overlooked in
Mhm.
how those were weighted, but still at the same time it needed to happen. Um, and and so we have to become uber efficient at what we do if the educational finance formula remains the same. So we were talking last night as our leadership team. We haven't done a thing at all, and already our budget is like $1.5 million more than it was last
Right.
year for FY
Right.
26. And we literally haven't done a thing.
Right.
It's, and it's because of healthcare and it's because of salaries and benefits, salaries. So like that can't continue. Our
Right.
communities can't afford that. Um, and at the same time, how are we looking ahead to what we want for our kids?
Right.
Like, how do we create innovative schools?
Mhm.
How do we prepare them? How do we have this mentality in Vermont of like the past and romanticizing what the past was and how good it was for kids and how it continues to be so good for kids. And in reality, I think that we might be leaving our kids behind a little bit because we can't provide opportunities, or we're not providing opportunities for a lot of innovation
Right.
in our school buildings when we're worried if our school buildings will have heat every day,
Right.
when they're so dilapidated or flood in my case. So there's so many pieces that hinge on what can we finance and how do we do that. And so I don't know what I want. Like I know immediate things that I'd like the legislature to do around that. Like they have to rethink of the healthcare legislation and how
Mhm.
that's bargained. And that gets into like nitty gritty stuff, right? But this one or nothing mentality around budgeting and or around healthcare and not being able to pick and choose pieces from each proposal is killing us right now. Like
Right.
I was just talking to Pietro Lynn 30 minutes ago, and we were predicting the healthcare increase to be 17%, which is awful, right? And it
Oh, sure.
came in just this morning at just below 12%. And I was cheering. And I was like, I'm cheering a 12% increase in healthcare.
Yeah.
Like something's
Yeah.
wrong.
Exactly. Exactly.
you know? So I will hope the legislature takes a look at that statute and how compromise can be more a part of it between the School Boards Association and the NEA. I don't want them to do a darn thing with the formula this year because we're already in budget season.
Sure.
They can do something that affects future budget years, but don't do it for
Sure.
this year.
Yeah.
I think they will. I'm nervous about going to an adequacy formula because I'm nervous about the Agency of Education having the capacity to define what
Right.
that is. I don't
Right.
think they can. So, but I know other states do that and use it
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Um, so I'd like to see them look at for some facilities piece and use it as a carrot and stick. I think we have too many schools. I just do.
Yeah.
And I've gotten pretty bashed for closing a school last year. But that goes back to romanticizing Vermont. And really truly does it what's best for kids. I know it's what's best for the adults in that community, but I'm not sure if it's what's best
Right.
for the kids in that community, in those really, really small communities. So, and we can't afford it. We just simply can't afford it. So if we want that, then you're going to have to pay a lot higher taxes. And for the same thing they've gotten for the same education they've gotten for years, it can't really change because we're not going to be able to.
Right. In addition to the piece you raised about, I'm worried about having heat today, and a lot of folks are worried about having enough teachers in the classrooms today, or, subs to cover the ones who are out. And so staffing is a tremendous issue as well.
And our friend Megan Roy points out quite rightly, we probably don't have a staffing issue if we're right sized with our schools.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. And then that other piece, and you alluded to it, is the clash between local control and equitable practices. We're almost trying to accomplish two things that are quite adversarial at the heart of it. How do we have equitable practices and hope for equitable outcomes if we don't have equitable expectations around school decisions around budgets?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
and
really,
a lot of that has to do with too many schools and
too many unfunded
not centralizing the control enough.
Right.
Right.
And unfunded mandates. We went through the EQS yesterday, the new EQS document, and we just put what's the financial responsibility of the school district in order to meet the need of this expectation in EQS, and it's pretty big.
Yeah.
There's a whole section on tiered systems of support. You can't do that without people, and those people are not classroom teachers.
Yep.
So how there's a lot of financial need in that document, as of course there should be. But is that recognized when we hear a governor say zero down your budget,
Right. Yeah, it's a fair point. Well, this is the time where we like to close, giving you a chance to do a shout out to somebody who's been instrumental to you in your career. So here's your chance to do the shout out as we close.
The shout out. I think I would shout out the female leaders in the Vermont superintendency, every single one of them. We have a really strong group of women who are leading school districts right now. And I can call any one of them with a cry, a celebration, a need, and they will call you right back. So I would shout out to all my female colleagues who are doing this gig with me. They make me laugh. One female superintendent, I won't call her out by name, but one superintendent sent an email to myself and somebody else saying, great professional learning opportunity for superintendent. And inside was an advertisement to become a male person. And it's like those kind of moments that just make you laugh out loud after a hard day. So I would make a shout out to all of the female leaders who are leading school districts and putting up with a lot of stuff that our fabulous male colleagues probably don't put up with either. But they're doing it with their head held high. So I love our women in Vermont.
Thank you. That's a great shout out. And thanks for the conversation. It's also really nice to hear about some of the successes and the things of which you're proud. All contextualized within all the challenges that superintendents in Vermont face on a regular basis. So thanks for the work you're doing, and thanks for this conversation. I know our members are going to find quite a few tidbits buried in there. My favorite being that curriculum directors are the lead learners in your system. First time I've heard it put that way. Won't be the last time I say
it. Yep. It's such a great job. Thank you so much for having me. I love it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Libby.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.